Hey, what's going on, everyone? And welcome to episode 7 of the Alec Walt Show. I'm your host, Alec Walt, alongside another very special guest. And today we're talking, Notre Dame football. Now, obviously, like I mentioned on my other show the other day with Chris Phillips on the Gamecocks, we are so freaking close to the NFL draft, just weeks away at this point. And joining us is my good friend Tom Scavetta for review and preview. And we're going to talk about the prospects for out of the University of Notre Dame. So, Tom, let's welcome to the show, man. How are you?
What's up, Alec? Thanks a lot for having me. Lucky number 7, huh? It's awesome to be here. It's awesome to talk some Notre Dame football, so really appreciate it.
Hell yeah, man. Well, one of the names you're going to hear pretty early, hopefully, in the NFL draft coming up in the first round is someone who's one of the more unique prospects in the NFL draft. Not only does he have one of my favorite names, but he's a guy you can line up absolutely all over the place. Tom, give us a breakdown of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. As you're probably going to say, just stick with JOK.
Yeah, JOK as they call him. So he's a redshirt junior at Notre Dame this year. Small guy. His body type kind of catches in between that safety to linebacker role. Doesn't exactly play with linebacker fundamentals. He's very similar to, if you remember, Isaiah Simmons from last year's draft class, very similar to that guy. Fun fact about him. So he was the first player that Notre Dame recruited to play the rover position, which is basically rushing the passer, playing the run, pass coverage. So he's very versatile. He can run with running backs. He can run with tight ends. He can run with slot receivers as well. You can leave him in there on third down packages. Versatility is a real key for him, Alec. He's a ball of energy, you like to say. He's an excellent sub-package player, can play the outside, nickel, box, violent tackler too, which was interesting. You know, you watched some games of him this year, Boston College, both Clemson games. And he was first team all conference selection with the Irish, led in tackles for loss, had 3 forced fumbles. And that's why he was named ACC Defensive Player of the Year. Outstanding stats. So I really like him a lot. But what do you think of him? Do you think do you think that he is the real deal? Because, I mean, personally, he's one of the best defensive players we've had in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at a player like JOK, I mean, yes, the weight is a concern. Obviously, he's a little bit undersized to play a linebacker position. When you're in those one-on-one situations, you want to make sure you can take down, NFL-level running backs. But the one thing I like about him is the versatility. I mean, I mentioned it to you in the original question. He's a guy that you can line up all over the field. Now, when you see the emergence of players like, Isaiah Simmons, like you mentioned, who was awesome in the second half last year, Jeremy Chin, who's one of the best rookies last year for the Carolina Panthers, a guy who lined up all over the field. Someone next year you're going to see in New England, Kyle Duggar, who's expected to have a promotion next year, play some more roles, a guy you can spot up all over the place. I like him a lot. I like the versatility. But, Tom, here's where I'm concerned. He's a guy where if he gets drafted to the wrong place, he is screwed. Because there are some teams that utilize versatility better. If he goes to a Belichick or a Salah, who I had in my last mock draft, him going to the Jets, I feel like those coaches will maximize his versatilities, but there's no guarantee every defense is going to know how to use him.
Yeah, so he is probably a mid to late first round guy. I think he fits the 4-3 scheme a lot better than the 4-3. In my opinion. He's been training in Texas throughout this process, and he ran a 6.83 cone. A guy who's 215, 220, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, I know he spoke with the Bills. I'd be surprised
if another team that would fit well in.
Exactly. See, I'd be surprised if he falls that far, but I think teams like, let's just say if the Giants trade back to 15, that could be a spot for him. The Browns, the Bucks, but I don't think he'll fall that far. It all depends what the need is at that position. Do you value him as an edge rusher? Do you value him as a linebacker? Do you value him as that hybrid or that rover type of player I brought up before? Yes, those concerns you brought up are definitely real legitimate concerns because he's not a fit for everybody in the NFL. And I think that could lead him to fall a little bit, but he's definitely a first round guy without a question.
So you recently released a mock draft on review and preview. Where did you have JOK landing?
I have him going to the Jets, 23rd overall.
I like that fit a lot. Because I think Salah's the guy that knows it's going to know how to use him. And plus, if you look at the Jets situation right now, they're likely going with the quarterback, Zach Wilson, unless they just stun us and do something stupid. But when you have a defensive-minded head coach like Robert Saleh who wants to, bring his level in defense, he's the guy that maximizes versatility, get to the passer, The Jets got a lot of things they need to figure out, but if they can get a guy who can, like JOK, who can line up all over the field, I think it's a great pick for the Jets there at the end of the first round.
Yeah, I think it would be too, because the Jets have pick number 2, which we know who that will be most likely, and then pick number 23, which is kind of a question because they can double dip at offense. But I think that would be silly with a defensive-minded head coach like Saleh. I think a Notre Dame prospect in Owusu-Koramoah would be an excellent fit there at number 23, which I believe that pick they acquired from the Seahawks, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so Owusu-Koramoah is the top Notre Dame prospect in this draft. Very versatile, as I mentioned. But yeah, that whole Rover story I found out. I was listening to a podcast about how when their new defensive coordinator came in, Owusu-Koramoah was the first. He was recruited to play that specific position, which is insane to even think about. And yeah, I mean, by the way, I don't know if you knew this either. This is another fun fact about him. This is a guy who went into his junior year with 0 tackles. None.
Really?
Yeah, he had a injury his sophomore year that kept him out. A lot of freshmen don't play on defense at Notre Dame because defense has been a strong suit. I mean, Notre Dame it's very rare you see guys come out early. A lot of 3-4 year guys. I mean, it's not like these or obviously have to play 2 years in college. But yeah, I mean, Owusu-Koramoah is a guy that I really like. I think he blossomed late, but I think the transition to the NFL should be pretty smooth. I just think, like I said earlier, he needs that right defensive scheme fit, because I don't think you can send him to a team like that runs a true 3. Like, I don't think you could play him opposite Myles Garrett, right? I don't think you could do that. I think that would be he can go to Cleveland, but I think that wouldn't be the best fit. I think a fit like the Jets would be a lot better, where, he could potentially get immediate reps and contribute right away, because he also has a knack for causing turnovers as well. So I think, those are a couple things you got to keep in mind with JOK.
Well, the thing is, when you look at picks really after 18, I think there's a lot of teams that he could fit on. I know you mentioned the Jets. I think the fit is perfect. 18, Miami, Brian Flores, one of the best defensive-minded coaches in the league. I don't know. Washington, I think he'd fit in well, even though I think they're a set 4-3. I think Rivera would know how to use him. I just don't know if that's the perfect defensive fit. Indy, great defensive team. I think he'd be awesome in Tennessee. And I think he'd be great in a place like Pittsburgh. There's a lot of teams there in that 18 to 25 range that he would absolutely fit in on.
Yeah, I think he needs to go to a team that already has a couple of established leaders on defense. Obviously, the Jets have a linebacker like in a CJ Mosley. They have Quinnen Williams up front. They just brought in Carl Lawson. So I think having and Vinny Curry, not to mention. So I think having guys like that could really benefit him, older players that have been around the block, and he could fill in and be an immediate contributor. Is there a possibility he might start out as a depth piece? Yes. I mean, we've seen this happen in the past. I mean, Isaiah Simmons barely played this year. I'm not trying to compare JOK to him that much, but I think he has a huge amount of upside that the NFL is going to be shocked by, because you play in the ACC for 1 year. I mean, Notre Dame pretty much plays an ACC schedule anyway. They just this year we were a member, but we're an unofficial member. That's what we are.
Yeah.
We're an independent, but he is going up against elite offensive linemen. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I think in the NFL, he can do so much. He'd be perfect for a defensive-minded coach where you could disguise blitzes with him, drop him back into coverage, stick with elite tight ends. Like, I know the Patriots now have guys like Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith you have to worry about. I think he could stick with those guys and make some plays. I think his ball awareness is great too. So, all in all, I think his ceiling is 15. I think his floor is the end of the first round. And it all depends what happens on draft night.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be teams moving all over. We've already seen trades. I mean, it was more towards the top of the draft, but teams aren't afraid to move. And if you got a versatile asset like this and you know how to use him in your defensive system, and we've seen it in Carolina, we're going to see it more next year in Arizona. We're going to see it more next year in New England. These hybrid linebackers, safety, do it all, line up all over the place, even help in pass coverage. It's a role that is trending in the right direction, and I do think that will help JOK on draft night in just a few weeks. Another name we could hear in the first round out of Notre Dame is offensive tackle Liam Eichenberg. Now, he was a guy that was hyped heading into the year. Obviously, he drops a little bit. Still think he's someone in the first round, but if you don't mind, Tom, give us a quick breakdown of the offensive tackle and how you think he fits on an NFL team.
So Liam Eichenberg comes out of the Notre Dame offensive line factory, pretty much.
Bingo.
I mean, it's a factory. That's what we produce. He's a 5-year guy, redshirt senior, 6'6", 320 pounds, great length, top offensive lineman in the ACC. This guy's an All-American, and our O-line coach, Jeff Quinn, has been with the program the last 7 years. Look what we've produced. Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey. And the reason why Eichenberg didn't really start getting snaps until 2018 was because he was behind Mike McGlinchey, who was our left tackle, and we saw how high up he went in the draft. Not McGlinchey. Eichenberg has started every game since week 1 of 2018, so he's a 3-year starter. He did play a few games in 2017 when there were some injury bugs going on. He's also, I mean, you may remember this from online, social media, whatever. He was notorious for playing with that black eye against Florida State. Mm-hmm. He had that black eye and he played through it. So he's a tough, nasty football player who has not given up a sack in over 30 games since 2018. I mean, not just the sack, he barely gives up pressures. He has such sound fundamentals and footwork. He's really, I mean, he's best in the run game where I think he does a really good job releasing vertically. Every one of his pass blocking snaps look the same as well. Consistent finisher on the second level. I mean, these are just footnotes you can talk about, for hours here about Eichenberg. Excellent in pass protection. Now, Brian Kelly said something interesting about him. He is predicting him to be a right tackle in the NFL, not a left tackle. As
that doesn't help his stock.
McGlinchey was a left tackle at Notre Dame. Now he's a right tackle for the 49ers in the NFL. So I think that was interesting. I think he can be a solid starting left tackle, but maybe he is more of a right tackle at the NFL level. There are a few concerns about this guy. In 2019, so Ian Book had this hand clap thing that he used to do where a lot of our offensive linemen would jump for false starts, illegal formation procedure, a lot of penalties. So Eichenberg did have some penalty issues in his junior year, but it wasn't just him. It was the entire line. Notre Dame got rid of that whole system with what Ian Book was doing. McGlinchey did a similar thing his second to last year too, back in 2016. So I think that's where he had some penalty issues. And Tommy Rees, as his offensive coordinator, has really helped Liam as a run blocker. So to define him, he's an elite run blocker with sound fundamentals and a really good pass blocker as well.
So we were kind of all over the place because it sounds like, yes, he has that. He's been nasty at Notre Dame. Obviously, Brian Kelly made the comments about right tackle, which if you're drafting a tackle in the first round, you'd prefer it to be on the left side. But we have seen in the past teams draft more on the right. At the end of the first round, we saw the Titans do it last year, even though that ended up being a disaster. Of course, that had to do with what he was doing off the field with Isaiah Wilson. So, taking everything you just said the last couple minutes, when the heck does he get drafted?
So my prediction is late first, early second. I think there's a couple of teams towards the last few picks in the first round that could snag him. A team that comes to mind is the Kansas City Chiefs. They are in dire need of a tackle. They just lost Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher and their center, Austin Ryder. They lost virtually over half their line. Now I know they brought in Joe Thuney, who actually that's one of Eichenberg's NFL comparisons, Joe Thuney, him and Eric Winston. So I think he could fall there. One other thing I wanted to bring up about him, his pro day, 33 reps on the bench press. That's better than any first round tackle from the last 5 years. The closest amount was last year. Austin Jackson had 27. And that's just one thing about him. Eichenberg also, his 20-yard shuttle, 4.57. That's pretty impressive. If that doesn't garner late first round, early second round talent, I think it would be a travesty if he falls any further than maybe the first 10 to 12 picks in the second round. There's rumors. I saw somebody on a mock had him going 19th overall. I think that's way too soon for him. But a team like the Colts could come in and say, hey, you're a former teammate of Quentin Nelson, right? Why don't you play next to him for us? We just lost Anthony Costanzo to retirement. I could see Nelson vouching for the Colts to take Eichenberg at, I think, 21 they're at. So
gotta protect Wentz.
I wouldn't be shocked. Colts, Steelers, and the Steelers could come in at 24. I know they've been linked to Najee Harris, but they may just say, the heck with that. Let's get Eichenberg in. Villanueva is a free agent. I don't think he's coming back. So, and they just lost Matt Filer as well. So there's a lot of teams in that late first round that need offensive line help, where a lot of these guys who might be second round talents, you see sneak in the back end of that first round. So I think late first, early second for Liam.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned, Joe Thuney is a pro player comparison. Thuney's a guard. Does Eichenberg have versatility along the line of scrimmage?
He does. So they're concerned about his arm length a little bit. His arms are relatively, they're not short, but they're not like alligator arms like Chris Snee had for the Giants. But they are, I think they're around 35 and a half, which I think that's probably the lower end of normal for a tackle. So I think he can play tackle, but I wouldn't be shocked. For a guy who's 6'6", 300 pounds, I don't think you should be playing left guard. But I know Joe Thuney's pretty big as well. But I think you got to compare him more to an Eric Winston, Mike McGlinchey type of player. I don't think he's as good as Mike McGlinchey, but I think he can be because McGlinchey started, I think, all 4 years. Liam only got 3. So it's going to come down to what the needs are in the draft. This is a tackle-heavy draft, Alec. So that's why I think he falls this far if he does.
Yeah, well, if you don't end up in Kansas City like you had in your mock draft, I think that'd be a great place. They did deal with some injuries towards the end of the season at the tackle position, went into the Super Bowl with some kind of changes along the offensive line. Obviously, there was more to it in the Super Bowl, but they want to make sure they maximize their versatility, get more guys who can play along the line of scrimmage, and Kansas City will probably see their way back in the Super Bowl very, very soon. Now, let's stay on the offensive line. Aaron Banks, you beast on the interior, man. What do you think about Banks' NFL potential?
So what's crazy about Aaron Banks is I think he has day 2 potential. He's a redshirt junior, 6'5", 338. That's insane for a left guard. And now you look at his vitals, right? 6'5", 338. He was a guy that Notre Dame was actually trying to get back for 2021. And he would have been our left tackle heading into this upcoming season. So that's interesting. They were trying to get him back, but obviously foregoing his last year of eligibility to enter. He's a large, explosive lineman with a nasty attitude who has a lot of upside. Again, this is a player similar to Liam Eichenberg, didn't start until around his 3rd year. Does a good job blocking down on opponents. I think what worries me about him is he struggles to slide in space and move around on the field. His footwork can improve and pass protection. And like I said, he didn't break into the starting lineup till 2018. Around midway through the year, he came in at left guard, and he's held that position ever since. So again, another versatile player. First team All-ACC, I'll take that. I have him going round 4. Excellent value pick. So that's where I have Aaron Banks. But yeah, that little nugget I found this morning, actually. He was supposed to come back as our left tackle in 2021. I would have loved to have him back, but our O-line is deep, so.
Yeah. Well, you said his size is huge. Does he have, if he was going to play left tackle, clearly Notre Dame, a very smart offensive line university, sees that he has the versatility. I don't know if you want to throw him into left tackle in the NFL. Obviously, you want that adjustment. Could he possibly play on the right down the road? That's a huge body. Yes, he has had some issues with the, pass protection and whatnot, but that almost sounds like a right tackle.
Yeah, he can easily be a right guard. He's not a center. Absolutely not.
No way.
He's either I can see him playing left guard or right guard. I can't see him sliding out to tackle
Okay.
only because of what I just mentioned. His footwork is too slow in pass protection. Unless he improves that, um, I think a team like Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Seattle, Houston could use him. So I think that's going to be very interesting to monitor.
So you wouldn't trust him on a team with a QB that's that mobile? Or
No,
like a
I
team
would
that
not.
loves to play the screen game, things like that?
In the screen game, yes. In the screen game, yes. I think that would be really interesting to see him, how he's able to move. I think as far as shotgun sets and what Banks is able to do in those types of situations, I wouldn't trust him as much. But in the screen game, he could potentially, I mean, it's weird because Notre Dame we didn't run too many screens last year
About to say,
to
I
my
don't think you guys ran
recollection.
that many either.
No. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with him. But I think he'll be okay in the NFL. He'll be a good starting guard. Sorry, that's my dog shaking over there. But yeah,
No
I
worries.
think he's going to be a good guard in the NFL regardless. I think he has a lot of upside to improve with his pass blocking.
Awesome. We'll talk about passing at Notre Dame. The man at quarterback was Ian Book. Obviously we have a top-heavy QB class. We've been talking about the top five, really, all over the place. Because what is San Francisco going to do? Is someone going to trade up? Who's going to fall? We've been talking about the QBs all the time. We haven't really been talking about Ian Book. Do you see him as a pro quarterback? Like, I'm not saying it's like mentioning him in the top five, but he's a name you could hear very much later in the draft.
So Ian Book is interesting. I see him as a long-term backup quarterback in this league. He's a small quarterback, only 6 feet. Again, 5-year player for us, redshirt senior, 210 pounds. His arms are a little over 31, and his hands a 9.875 on his hands. So again, this was a 3-star guy who was supposed to play for Washington State.
Wow.
Which is where Gardner Minshew came out of, I'm pretty sure. So he was not highly recruited, but yet he was somehow our winningest quarterback. 3-year start. Look, Alec, he has all the intangibles. He's very tough. His toughness is insane. He's a capable athlete who can run and does a nice job filling pocket pressure. So if you're talking pro comparison, I mean, maybe Colt McCoy. I know that's not very good,
Not bad.
but look, Book made a name for himself. He came in the Citrus Bowl his freshman year, redshirt freshman season. He beat LSU. He replaced Brandon Wimbush in 2018, caused them to transfer. He led us to 2 college football playoffs. He doesn't turn the ball over. He's a smart game manager who limits turnovers. I think his ceiling is a player like an Alex Smith. I think I can see that. Which, by the way, Alex Smith never turned the ball over. Book went 266 passes between interceptions last year. He only threw 3 the whole year. In 2019, he had 34, 35 touchdowns and only 5 or 6 picks. So that's what I like about him. I think he needs to get through his progressions a lot quicker, though, if he's going to be an NFL quarterback. Because as I mentioned, his size and his arm strength are below NFL standards.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned like he has a chance to be a long-term backup. I mean, if you're going to be a replacement of some of these starting quarterbacks in the NFL, what our coach is going to make sure you don't do, turn the ball over. And that's not something he does very often. So Ian Book should be an interesting name. Any idea where you think he could get taken?
So he's definitely a day 3 guy. I think he does get drafted. I think a team like maybe Tampa Bay, Atlanta, or Detroit, maybe even Kansas City could bring him in and say, hey, we want you as a backup quarterback. I think 6th round, I think late 6th round, early 7th, I think is probably where he goes. But you never know. You never know. Somebody may turn around and say, we really like your toughness. We want to take you in round 5. So I think he can't go any sooner than round 5, but he's definitely a day 3 prospect. I can guarantee you that. Strong appeal.
Yeah. No, it'll be interesting. I think Ian did a really good job this last year improving his draft stock. I mean, he definitely took that step forward last year at Notre Dame. I don't think he took the step to prove that he's worthy of taking over a team very early, but he definitely made that step forward. And like you mentioned, he's the winningest quarterback at Notre Dame. He did. I gave him a lot of smack on Transportal Podcast, got a bunch of heat for it. But, at the end of the day, the kid can play. We'll see where he ends up at the draft. Finally, Tom, Tommy Tremble. Everyone wants a pass-catching tight end. Everyone wants to improve at the tight end position. Obviously, that's a little bit thin from a talent depth perspective. I don't think this guy's going to start day one, but give me your thoughts on Tremble. Is there any way he could possibly be a reliable tight end on some NFL team?
He can. Junior, 6'4", so he's tall, 248 pounds. Actually, he came into Notre Dame pretty undersized. He turned into this incredibly elite blocker, which nobody was expecting. He didn't have any touchdowns this year. He had 4 last year, but the problem was he was always paired with an elite tight end. With good offensive linemen usually comes good tight ends, and that's what Notre Dame produces. Great linemen, great tight ends. Cole Kmet was a second rounder last year. Mike Mayer, the freshman, was insane. They call him Baby Gronk. Mayer was actually tied for their leading receiver as a freshman, but Tremble himself is a former All-ACC honorable mention. He's very athletic. He has a lot of speed too, but he needs to be a better route runner. He needs to be a better pass catcher. I know drops are a problem with him. He could have day 2 value potentially. So I know we were talking about this earlier. He can potentially sneak into the back portion of day 2. I think, the lack of catches and the drops were a concern earlier in the season, but as we progressed and got more towards the college football playoff, that improved a lot. By the way, he had a great pro day. Did you know he ran a 4.5 940?
I did not.
That's pretty impressive.
That's great for a tight end.
Yeah, and they're saying he's more of an H-back, but I think his best football is really ahead of him. I really do.
All right, well, Tom, final question. Any other names out of Notre Dame we could hear on draft night?
There's a couple. I think Ade Ogundeji, defensive lineman, 5-year guy. I think that's potentially a guy who could go in the 6th round, maybe 3-star recruit, but he had 6 sacks in 2020. High motor type of player who can bring the juice. Another Senior Bowl invite player, strong guy, can get leverage on opponents. I think he could fit teams like the Panthers or the Jets, maybe the Titans or Bears, Packers, maybe potentially. Ade Ogundeji, big guy to look out for, huge arms. Robert Hainsey, a senior, right guard for Notre Dame. He played right tackle. 4-year starter. Every start came at right tackle for us. He was labeled as a leader at Notre Dame on our O-line for the last 2 seasons. 2-time captain, played guard in the Senior Bowl, and I think he could go in the 6th round. I think a team like the Vikings or even your Patriots could potentially bring him in. I know the Patriots could use maybe a utility guy on that line. I think Hainsey could potentially be your guy. So I think those 2 are guys to look out for. And I do have one more, actually. Tommy Kramer, grad student. We talked about Liam. We talked about Banks. Tommy Kramer is the most experienced lineman Notre Dame has. He started all 39 games at Notre Dame. Not as athletic as these other guys, but he's a really good technician. He is probably a 7th-round pick, can go undrafted. So those are the 3 names that I would look out for. 2 O-linemen, 1 defensive lineman. Oh, and Dalen Hayes, another 5-year guy, late day 3 prospect, very athletic, explosive defender. So those 4 guys, I think, are guys that you should really look out for in that day 3 range to see if they fall. So I think 7 to 8 guys might get drafted out of Notre Dame this year.
Cool. Well, the last time Bill Belichick drafted an offensive lineman in the 6th round, it was Michael Onwenu, who looks like he has a pretty bright future in New England. So, hey, if it works, keep it going. I'd love to see where some of these guys get selected in the 2021 NFL Draft. Before we let you go, where can our listeners keep in touch with your channel on social media?
Absolutely. So you can subscribe to our channel at Review and Preview Sports on YouTube. We have a Facebook page as well, Review and Preview Sports, our Instagram and Twitter account as well. And we do a lot of good stuff there. We have a lot of good shows. I have a baseball show that just started, basketball show, and my show, Review and Preview, that happens every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. So if you want to check us out on Facebook Live, feel free. And Alec, thank you so much. This was awesome. Definitely a pleasure being on with you, and really love talking football with you in general.
All right, well, that's going to be it for this episode of the Alec Walt Show. I'm Alec Walt alongside Tom Scavetta. What do you think of the prospects out of Notre Dame? Feel free to comment that below. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Down the Block Sports for more of my exclusive content. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon.